This is the time and place for the Jobs Development Authority Growth Funds Committee meeting. Welcome and a roll call.
Crary? Here. Doppler? Holt?
Here.
Kvamme?
Here.
Weber?
Here.
Whitney?
Here.
Wolf?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Very good, thanks. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from our last Growth Fund meeting. Move approval. Have a motion from Mr. Kvamme. Second. Second from Mr. Holt. Any further questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thanks, everyone. The next item on the agenda, Mr. Conlon.
Yes, we have a fairly straightforward request for you tonight. In late 2020, last year, we gave a $22,000, $885 flex-based loan to Associated Potato Growers for some equipment. They're just looking for a lead lender change. So the lender at the time was Bremer Bank. They're switching that over to First State Bank. All the terms of the loan and stuff remains the same. No change other than the lead lender. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Our position remains the same, guarantees are the same.
Everything, position, security, all that remains the same.
Very good, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Conlon. Any questions or comments from committee members?
I would move approval.
I have a motion from Mr. Holt.
Second.
Second from Mr. Crary. The motion on the floor, hearing no further comments, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Ms. Richards, the defederalization of the EDA RLF.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. We have a very EDA-heavy agenda today, and our first item is the defederalization. We discussed this briefly at prior meetings when we were kind of looking long-term at what some of our potential program changes and objectives would be, and I believe I mentioned that EDA was pushing this. There were a lot of CARES Act RLFs established, and they're looking to defederalize some of these legacy RLFs, which are defined as RLFs that have been operational for 7 years or more, and that gives their staff time to focus on these kind of new RLFs plus the additional funding that's coming down the pike. In any case, I did visit with our EDA representative and was assured that these truly are defederalized and the funds could be used as the local match for our grant request to fit up the Herald building. And while we haven't been officially notified that we will receive those funds, we've had very strong indications that that award will be forthcoming. So my request to you is to authorize me to submit that request to defederalize funds and use it for the purposes of a match for that fit-up project. The numbers work out pretty well. The grant request is just over $1 million, and the total capitalization of our RLF is 1.385, so it could fully meet the match requirements, and there would still be funds available for some of the furnishings and equipment that's not eligible under the EDA grant. I'm going to have to check with our rep to make sure how, I don't want to be so premature as to ask for a match for a grant we don't have, but I do want to get this request in while EDA is very eager to defederalize these funds. So with that, certainly stand for any questions.
Very good. Let me clarify to make sure I understand correctly. So these are funds that we've had for over 20 years now, federal funds that have been in a revolving loan fund, often with many strings attached to them.
Correct.
Those strings are now being relaxed to the point where we can actually use them to match another EDA grant that we've applied for to cover the expense of the tech center we're intending in the Herald building. And do these dollars have to be paid back then? The matching funds, do they need to be paid back?
No, they are ours to spend. Assuming EDA grants our request to defederalize the funds with this proposed use, we're good. I do want to mention that having this revolving loan fund available for gap financing has been a very good thing for the Growth Fund. And so when our COVID response program gets to that revolve stage, it could certainly fulfill that role. But for now, it seems it seems wise to take advantage of this opportunity to get, turn federal funds into local dollars and basically meet all our match requirements.
And our hope is that the COVID revolving loan funds that we'll be discussing in a little bit would replace these dollars. Yes.
Correct. In terms of function, we would still have a revolving loan fund that would, in time, all those normal EDA requirements will return, and then it could, the C-Run program can fulfill the role that this legacy RLF has for the last 20 years.
This is astonishingly good news.
I was very surprised to get
Yes.
the right answer to my question to EDA, so.
And we're still waiting for final approval on all of this, but the indications are that they are supportive of this, even promoting this kind of innovative use of the funds.
They're supportive of our grant application to fit up the Herald, and they're supportive of us defederalizing these funds to support that use. So, yeah, best day I've had in a long time when I got off the phone with EDA.
Well, one last question for me, and then I'll leave it to the committee members. Whose idea was this? This is a great idea.
My staff,
Yes, your staff.
yes.
Yourself and your staff.
Yes.
It's fantastic. All right,
Thank
great.
you, Mr. Weber.
Any questions, comments from committee members? Mr. Kwame?
So the C-Run RLF, will that have any additional requirements that will limit its use as opposed to how it can be used now?
Right now, we're in this 2-year window of disbursement for disaster recovery. Once that 2-year period is over and we start using the revolved funds, EDA's normal requirements about, leveraging funds and caps on the interest rate, those will come back. And so while we don't have to mirror the program, we will have to mirror some of the requirements of this program. And, again, we've still got time to figure it out. We could do other things with the revolved portion of the COVID money, but it would be very simple to just kind of let it morph into what this legacy RLF has been.
So there wouldn't be any roadblocks if we wanted to just treat it exactly the same?
No, we
could.
basically have to tell EDA that that's what we want to
Sure.
do, but I don't anticipate any concerns.
And then second question, seeing that we have $560,000 available on our cash balance, would we take out debt to pay for the rest?
We're basically borrowing from ourselves.
Sure.
And we could use our existing cash to pay for the fit-up and then repay ourselves with these defederalized payments as they come in.
So we wouldn't take out bonds, we would actually be able to just borrow. Perfect.
Right.
All right, thank you.
And I should just note that our cash balance today is $560. We do have a request later in the agenda for Sundog to take some of those dollars. But again, they'd come back to us just over time. It would reduce our cash balance.
And indeed, over the last 20 years, there have been more than a few times where we've had difficulty putting these funds to work. So
We have frequently had issues with having too much available cash on hand, yes.
federal dollars that we were trying to put to work. Anything further from committee members?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Wolf, please.
yes, thank you. Meredith, thank you. Ms. Richards, thank you for the update. As you've mentioned, this has been a good source for gap financing in the past, and in the future, we hope to be able to use the C-Run funds when they're available. In the interim period, do we have dollars available for gap financing needs that might arise?
Well, we don't have a, kind of a standalone program. We certainly could treat a request as we did the request from Airtonomy, for instance, where if we get a good request, we do have cash available, and we could mirror the parameters of the EDA program without having necessarily a fund set aside for it.
Okay. Thank you. That was my only question.
Ms. Whitney.
Mr. Wolf asked my first question, so Ms. Richards, thank you as well. I think this is very good news. My only question is, I do believe we just have to make sure as a community that we are still demonstrating that it's for economic development purposes, correct? So
Correct.
do we have a reporting requirement of any nature to the EDA to demonstrate that? Or is it, just we simply say in our defederalization that we're going to use it for X and that then meets the requirement because they've approved it?
That's how it's been explained to me. We make the request, and attached to your staff report is a draft that EDA provided of the agreement that would actually release us. So it does kind of spell out, based on, code, what is going on. But the upshot is, EDA reserves the right to check in on us, and if they should find that we have done something that doesn't meet economic development purposes, they could request that the funds be sent back, or perhaps demand is a better term, but there is no reporting requirement. And in fact, if we request defederalization for an eligible use and it's approved, and we should change our mind down the road, as long as it is still an eligible use, we don't need to resubmit a request to EDA. They're being extremely generous with this defederalization process, and I think they're very eager to let the communities use these funds as they see fit, as long as it is clear that it's for economic development purposes, not, building a school or buying a fire truck.
Excellent, thank you. I would assume, given that the EDA grant for the construction presently is going to have an economic development tie and 9 years of reporting after it, it'd be pretty easy to make that argument from a city's perspective.
Correct.
Thank you. That's it for me.
Very good, thank you. Anything further? Otherwise, I'd be looking for...
Mr. Chair, if I could-
Yes, please.
Mr. Chair, if I could say.
Oh,
one
Mr.
thing, I'm
Phelan,
sorry.
yes.
Number one, thanks to Meredith. And I think given flexibility, you only get flexibility if you performed well in the past. So, these come post-flood. So hopefully we can do the same with these other disaster loan funds. So I want to thank Meredith has been here the longest operating this, and federal government doesn't give you flexibility unless you've earned it. So we've earned that through our proverbial bank account through that. And I think this is a better use because we can use, and we all want gap funding, and we're going to talk about that later. But if gap funding is great, if we use federal dollars, it should be even better if we use our local dollars with more flexibility. So I think that's what we're trying to do. Let's use these post-federal funds that had limited restrictions. Let's use those, and that frees up over $1 million that we were probably anticipating investing in the tech accelerator, and that frees it up for other opportunities that we may have that we want more flexibility. So I think it's a win-win in this case. So thanks to Meredith and her team for allowing us, doing all the great things in the past to allow us to do things in the future.
Absolutely, well said. With that,
I just have a process question
Yes,
regarding this. Just looking at the staff recommended action, it just says to authorize submitting the request to the EDA to defederalize and use the funds for the fit up of the tech accelerator. We can take those in one shot, or do we need separate actions on those two items as a part of that?
One motion is fine.
Okay. That's all I needed to know.
I'm going to, between this meeting and the JDA meeting, I'm going to speak to our EDA rep and figure out just how much leeway I have, and, if we need to craft a resolution that's signed by the JDA. But the key here today is agreeing with the spirit of the request.
is anyone willing to make a motion? Move approval. Fantastic, thanks. Motion from Mr. Kvamme.
Second.
And a second from Ms. Whitney. Hearing no further comments, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Again, thank you for this. And
Thank you.
quickly, Mr. Bernstrom, for our committee members joining over Zoom, can we make the room available to them on the camera? Maybe it looks different for them, I don't know. Very good. I'll let you take care of that, great. The next agenda item, C-Run modification. So we've just been talking about what we've referred to as the legacy revolving loan fund from the EDA, and now we're talking about the COVID-related revolving loan funds. First item is modifications to the program we've had in place for the last several months now.
About
Ms.
6
Richards.
months, yes. Well, at our previous meetings, we were encouraged by this group to, kind of in the context of how could we do better with this program to increase the usage, to increase its value to the community. We were encouraged to talk to some of our past applicants, people who hadn't applied, to see why or what could be done. And Colin and Brandon have done that over the past month. The recommendations in your staff report kind of reflect what they heard. We have, how many do we have? 6. Some of them are quite substantive. Part of our approach is to raise our maximums to kind of the federally mandated maximums, so that we don't have to continue to amend our plan to EDA. So we're looking at raising maximums, extending loan terms in our plan, but always remembering that you and the JDA have ultimate discretion. And so once I get through preambling and we hear from Colin and Brandon, then I'd like to come back and kind of talk about, we have these very flexible maximums. Let's talk about, from an operational point of view, what actual limits are you comfortable with from an advertising point of view? So if, for instance, if we say that we've raised the loan cap to a maximum of $347,500, which is the maximum EDA allows, would you be comfortable with us advertising loans of up to $200,000? We would have the flexibility should somebody come with a fantastic request at 300, but we're not going to go out and actively seek loans of an amount that this group isn't comfortable with. So we've got raising the loan cap, expanding the eligible uses to add equipment or machinery. EDA's rationale with this is we're not trying to interfere with private banks or their ability to have a business go off in a completely different direction. This is if a company has found through the course of the pandemic that they would be more resilient should this come around again, heaven forbid, or just to make their current pandemic response operations more functional, the purchase of equipment could be very valuable. Right now, we're limited to working capital. The example I used with EDA was Rhombus. If you sell beer and pizza and people can't come in and drink your beer and eat your pizza, maybe if they could, package their pizza for, bake at home or frozen pizza, that would be a legitimate COVID response that would make their business stronger in the long term as well as more resilient for the future. EDA was absolutely good with that, and so that's kind of the spirit in which we are recommending adding equipment to the list of eligible uses. Also, increasing the loan term, increasing the deferral. This is just to make the payback easier, obviously, as businesses are coming back. Expanding the targeted sectors and simplifying the application, which is kind of an ongoing process, but something that's already underway. And then, of course, marketing the program, but we have to make sure of what we're marketing before we do that. So in any case, I'm going to let Colin and Brandon talk about what they heard, and then we'll come back with more detail on how to implement this.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Richards. Mr. Hanson, welcome.
Chair Weber, members of the Growth Fund Committee. Meredith did a really good job of going over some of the main changes we're proposing here. A few things I wanted to touch on first before we kind of get into some of that feedback is there is urgency from the EDA to expend these funds. And while we have a deadline of June 30th, 2022 to spend the entire all of the investment we've received, they want to see it spent on a schedule. So we need to be working down this on a timetable that suggests we can get it all out. We can't put $1 million out on June 29th, 2022 and expect to still have those funds there when we do so. So we need to be spending this on a timetable that shows we're able to spend the funds. Now with that, if we are not able to disperse these funds on that timetable, there's a risk that the EDA will claw back some of those funds and award them to other communities that are using their CRUN or their RLF. On the other side, if we're using these more quickly, there is an opportunity that we could receive additional investment from communities that aren't able to disperse those funds. So there is urgency here to spend these funds, as well as additional competition from the ARPA, the other stimulus bill that was just passed by the new Congress. There's more programs coming out, and so for federal programs and state-developed programs coming out, we have some potential for increased program competition for COVID recovery coming forward. So with that, we interviewed about 16 businesses. As with these conversations, general statements don't apply to all of them. Businesses vary very greatly. They're very different from one another. So when you see some general statements or anything about industry, just know it doesn't apply to everyone. But with that, with these changes, some of the things I really wanted to hit on here, When it comes to kind of C-run awareness and the decision on whether or not to apply, there's mixed messages, or not mixed messages, there's mixed reasons for folks not being interested or whether or not they wanted to apply. Some folks aren't ready for debt at this point. Some are just getting by. They're cash flow neutral, and they're just not interested in debt at this time. Others have had programs meet their needs currently, so they're not looking for additional debt. And for the few that we did talk to, some that are interested in debt, it may not have been the right time, or they are ready, but maybe they aren't eligible under the program guidelines as they are. They might need more than $50,000, or they're kind of waiting to see how these program changes shake out. So of these changes, we wanted to include acquisition of equipment and machinery. Ms. Richards mentioned some of the reasons for that. There is interest of potential applicants that would look to invest in equipment that would allow them to either expand kind of the inventory they have in their retail store or different changes like that. Increasing the maximum loan amount, very common, was the interested businesses would likely request a minimum of $50,000. Most cases, businesses were looking anywhere from $100,000, $150,000, or up to $200,000 in a loan would be what would be best for them to get through. Of those businesses that are interested as well, an overwhelming theme we saw from some of those is limited access to existing programs. One of the things that the C-Run does that a lot of other programs don't do is if you didn't have a strong fiscal year 19, for whatever reason, that could be personal reasons or maybe your business moved. There are many different reasons why fiscal year 19 didn't look as good, and you compare that to fiscal year 20. Some of the programs required a 25% decrease in revenue from fiscal year 19 to 20. Some businesses can't demonstrate that, and when you're not eligible for one program, there's a good chance you're not eligible for multiple programs. With the C-Run program, we really try to look at each individual business and their circumstances and say, okay, what other ways can we look to see whether or not you were impacted by COVID and you have the ability to repay? So that can more so lean on pro forma documents, cash flow pro formas, and seeing past performance of the business before 2019. We had good feedback on the interest rate. Almost most people thought 1% was a very fair interest rate. No qualms about the interest rate. The deferral period, a lot of potential applicants were interested in a 12-month deferral, especially for seasonal businesses or for those that rely on events or retail specifically. There was a lot of confidence, a lot of optimism going into this, what I'm calling the summer of recovery. There's lots of optimism going forward, but they said 1 year under their belt before payment starts would really help them with cash flow and confidence going forward, especially with some nervousness around COVID variants. With the repayment period, we had requests to extend that, some want up to 10 years. Our current EDA plan maximum is 10 years. That's giving the JDA discretion to go up to 10 years if the right application comes or the circumstances call for it. What we're asking for is to change the standard beyond 5 years to 7 years. As we're including equipment as part of the C-Run program, JDA policy calls for a 7-year term, generally up to 7 years for equipment, and we'd like to apply that 7-year term to every C-Run loan regardless of whether it's for equipment or working capital or both. As far as kind of the current outlook of businesses we were able to visit with, not every business experienced supply chain disruptions, but for those who did, it was very impactful on their cash flow. And they've had increase in prices of raw materials and frequent delays in shipping. Confidence in the market, though, is looking very optimistic. January and February proved good for sales for a lot of folks, which is a good indication that things are starting to recover. People are excited to get out and again. Current debt to equity load really varies greatly by business and industry. Overall, debt to equity is moderate to high for a lot of businesses. And there's a lot of anxiety around COVID-related debt service coming up soon. That's kind of a vague way. I couldn't get a clear idea from the folks I visited with of when they're really expecting that to take place. EIDL just recently extended their deferral for another year on payments. But when those debt service payments kick in, that nervousness is another reason why we would want to extend our initial deferral and lower the monthly payments with a longer term. As far as cash flow, most businesses, again, most are neutral or neutral moving to positive, which is a good sign as well. Several business owners are foregoing pay to stay neutral or slightly positive too, so while things are looking up, we're not out of the weeds yet there. And generally, we asked businesses if opportunities existed, if there was additional capital available. Generally, yes, although some of those opportunities are not well defined. For some, they have clear idea of what they want to move forward with, and an opportunity like the C-Run program would be great for them to be able to get the capital necessary to grow out of this recovery. And that's a really good segue to kind of talk about the two targeted businesses, types of businesses or circumstances for this program. While initially we had thought of COVID-related programs as let's just get businesses through to the other side, just to hold on, kind of white knuckle at the edge of just staying cash flow neutral. There's an opportunity here to really use these funds to allow businesses to grow out of this COVID pandemic and grow into this recovery. And as Ms. Richards said, there is support from the EDA to be able to do that as well. In fact, that's a requirement the EDA asks, is how are these funds helping businesses recover, not just get through the pandemic. So with those two as our targets, some other changes we wanted to include was simplifying the application process. We asked for a lot more information than the typical program does. And that's because this is not a grant and it's not a forgivable loan. We have to do our due diligence to make sure we believe that applicants can really pay the loan back, that there's an ability to repay, and that we have been working, it's a continued effort to simplify this process. So far, we've cut the application back about 2 pages without compromising the information we receive, and we're reviewing kind of the financial statement requirements that we ask of businesses to say, what do we really need to make that determination, and do we need to ask for everything we receive? So the last change that we have is expanding the targeted sectors to include administrative support, waste management, and remediation services. Some of the examples of businesses we'd be looking to open up to would be travel-related agencies, janitorial, carpet, and upholstery cleaning companies, as well as waste collection and treatment and remediation services. We've already provided a loan to AAA Quality Cleaners, which would fall under this NAICS category, but this opens us up to help other services that don't fall under kind of the professional services category of the NAICS system of organizing industry. So with that, are there any questions on the program or the recommended changes?
Any questions for Mr. Hanson? Mr. Russell, please.
First off, couple random questions. Just to clarify, these funds with C-Run, if you don't use them, you lose it, right? We essentially have an X amount, so we want to try to utilize as much as we can from the Fed so we can bring them local, and then essentially that translates into a revolving loan fund as well for future.
Absolutely, and if we don't get those funds out,
Initially.
long term, we're really cutting ourselves off at the knees by giving us a smaller revolving loan fund to work
Right,
with.
okay, so that's one, just want to make sure of that. Did you have any feedback, and I'm not 100% positive on all the ramifications of C-Run and the application process, the business's feedback on the ability for capital from the private sector lending institutions, or is this one of the ones where there's so many programs, is this one of the ones that requires a bank, like, denial letter or not? So did they comment at all on the local environment? I just want to make sure we're not competing too much with the local lenders as well.
Absolutely. There are some businesses that have taken out private debt as well to address COVID. In fact, there was some feedback of there would be interest in some sort of an interest rate buy-down program or refinancing program, which C-Run can't serve, can't fulfill that purpose, but there is interest in that. So there are folks who have taken private debt on to address COVID. As far as that, there is no EDA regulatory requirement to require a turn-down note, but for larger loans, especially those over $100,000, it would be prudent for us, especially including equipment, to ask for a turn-down note or a letter of support from the primary lender of businesses to show that we're not intending to compete with those lenders.
Thank you. And that kind of answered my next question, just that if it could be possible to use that then for essentially to refinance existing debt, because obviously the local banks be made whole if they're worried, and then obviously they have 1% interest rate, a lot of deferrals. There's a lot more. It's very advantageous then. I think a lot of businesses would capitalize on that, but that's not in the parameters of CRUN for.
Yeah, so refinancing is not a legitimate or an eligible use of the funds. You can use it to pay your regular debt service, your regular operational monthly payments, but as far as paying off debt and shifting it over to CRUN, that is not an eligible use of the funds.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Chair, this is Mr. Wolf.
Yes, Mr. Wolf, please, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Hanson, thank you again. Great overview, and appreciate all that you've done to put into this. A few questions. If I understand correctly, again, our current loan limit's $50,000. We're looking to increase to the to the EDA allowed cap of almost $350,000. You're looking for guidance. I think I heard, $200,000 as a maximum loan amount earlier, but looking guidance from the group. So let's say that we did go to $200,000 as a maximum loan amount. We have about $1 million left. Do you have any insight into how many businesses we might be able to help with this change of going to up to 200,000? Is that 5 of them, 5 more? Is that 10? Do we have any insight or guess on that, Mr. Hanson or Ms. Richards?
Of the handful of businesses I talked to that were interested in a loan that would be above 50,000, they're looking at 100 or 150,000. I know of one potential applicant that would be interested in a $200,000 loan, but for the most part, $200,000 would be the upper limit of the requests that I anticipate. And of course, Brandon also visited with folks. I don't know if there was any interest.
Yes, Mr.
outside.
Bombeck, you've been out beating the bushes with some of these higher loan possibilities. Would you like to speak to that? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. Yeah, one in particular, primary sector company that's been growing prior to COVID and continues to grow, has been put into a real cash flow crunch, I guess, at this time. And when learning about this product in particular, they were the ones who I asked the question of how much would you need to help you get through and grow through this scenario, and I can give more detail around that, but they said $200,000. So I think Colin had one and I had one. I don't anticipate we have 10 of those applicants.
Yeah. Very good, thank you. If I could continue, Mr. Chair.
Please.
So it's, maybe another 10 businesses. If everyone needs $100,000 that we could help, that's helpful. I would be personally supportive of a cap or internal policy of up to 200,000 if there potentially would be a need. That's my personal opinion. Mr. Crary brought it up. I think it's wise from a turn down letter aspect if we're going to get into equipment financing. I believe for loans over, I think Mr. Hanson said over a certain dollar amount, maybe it's $100,000 requiring a turn down letter, just to make sure that we are not competing with the local financial institutions. I think that would be wise. And then in some of the materials, Mr. Hanson, Ms. Richards, I think one of the things that we found out was, we had $1.3 million. We've helped 300,000 already. We have $1 million. One of the potential problems why we didn't roll out more of this thus far was communication and awareness. What are our thoughts on how can we improve the communication to the potential businesses that would help from this, these changes? Any thoughts or comments on that, please?
I think already we've benefited from the direct outreach we've had in interviewing businesses. There's certainly already a little bit more discussion going on with interest in the program. I think more aggressive marketing efforts to lenders now, especially given when we launched the program, there were many other federal programs as well as statewide programs that were coming out. We were definitely competing for attention a lot more. Now that some of those programs have slowed down or folks have a better idea of what all of those programs are, we really have an opportunity to show this program as an opportunity to grow. And again, I think part of the marketing message, not only simplifying the application and simplifying the messaging and emphasizing 1% interest loan for COVID recovery, is this idea that we're pursuing two different targeted business types or business circumstances. You have ones that are holding on that need to get through to the beginning of this recovery, and you have others who want to grow out of that. There's certainly better marketing opportunities there. Another piece of feedback we heard was that specifically this program was difficult to find on the city website. Last week we started working on that already and have been developing changes to that to make it more accessible and easy to find. And I've also been working with the EDC to get the program on their website and hopefully improving that communication. One other thing we'd be looking to do is some traditional marketing of printing posters out, getting them posted on billboards, and continuing to reach out to those service organizations like SBDC and SCORE that are visiting with businesses every day and letting them know of the program changes, the ones that take effect, and letting them know we're here to help.
Thank you. I have no other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Mr. Kavami, please.
So thank you for looking at it. I appreciate all the time you guys have spent. I definitely think we need to get these funds out there. I think I have some concern on equipment loans and how that'll be used. So the example of Rhombus wanting to freeze their pizzas, that's a perfect example of within their current business model, they're trying to adapt. Now, Rhombus came to you and said, I want to invest in chocolate-covered treats, right? So that's not their current business model.
Yep.
So in my world, is there a way that we can, if it's an equipment loan, is that coming to us no matter what anyway? Or is that an opportunity for us to check that? Because what I don't want to do is compete with banks, and I also don't want to allow them to take something and shift their business and take advantage of a program that's not designed to allow them to change business, but to allow them to survive, right?
Yeah, and these funds specifically from the EDA have to be COVID-related, and it has to be related to COVID recovery. So it still has to fit with the nature of the business, and we have to be able to tie this equipment purchase to helping them recover from COVID. And that recovery has to have what EDA refers to as a nexus or a tie back to the COVID impact. So our hope is that equipment requests or equipment loans that we get would have some sort of direct connection to that COVID impact and would be within the scope that would be expected of a business. So if we had a cleaning business that wants to buy new cleaning equipment, for example, that's already within the purview of what they do. Maybe it helps them do it more efficiently or opens up a smaller niche market that's related to what they're already doing.
Today, staff are seeking input on program modifications. And ultimately, each one of these loan applications would come to the Growth Fund for final approval.
Absolutely.
But we would have sufficient guidelines to evaluate exactly the kind of thing you've just asked about.
I appreciate that, and I know that we need to expand it to meet needs, but I'd much rather see $20,000, $50,000 loans than five $200,000 loans. I think the money needs to get out, and we need to help people operate and stay open. I'm concerned about giant loans that are potentially, if someone's willing to take on $200,000 of debt, that must be a monster business, and probably they could have got a loan somewhere else. And so I'm just worried about that. So I think that if we can have a turn down at some point, whether if that's 100,000, that would make me feel better.
We don't want to be competing with banks, as properly noted. On the other hand, it's worth remembering that one of the reasons for modifying this program is there's been a challenge in getting the funds out. Yeah. Mr. Holt.
Thank you. And I agree with everything that's been said so far. So thanks to the committee members, Mr. Hanson, Mr. Baumbach, Ms. Richards, thanks for all your work on this. A couple of questions. We're here having this discussion because we haven't had many applicants, but we have had some. We've had a handful, right? Would these terms then be retroactively applied to the loans that we've already approved? Would they have to go through the process all over again, or how would that work, or can we decide that as a part of these modifications?
Great question. We're hoping that we can include in this applying some of the terms retroactively to already executed loans, allowing us to restructure those. Specifically, what we would be looking to include is we wouldn't increase in any way the loan amount dispersed to those businesses. We wouldn't alter the interest rate specifically. would be extending the terms to 7 years as opposed to 5, so 60 months to 84 months, and then extending the initial deferral from 6 months to 12 months.
So if committee members are comfortable with the kinds of modifications being suggested, including the one you are, Mr. Holt, that recommendation would go forward to the JDA for final approval. Today, the staff are seeking these kinds of inputs. Yeah.
And we would like authorization to just do that administratively rather
Yeah.
than bring each one back to this group. So thank you for reading our minds, Mr. Holt.
Yeah, and follow-up question with that, Mr. Hanson, you mentioned that you wouldn't increase the loan amount, but those previous applicants applied for a certain amount because there was a cap on it. So would there be a situation if they came back and said, well, if the cap was more, I would have applied for more, that we would entertain that, or how would that work? Tagging along with that, both you and Mr. Baumbach said you talked to companies that were in a growth trajectory, right? So when we talk about the cap here for this, for being 200,000, are there situations, are we talking about per application? Are we talking about per company? Is there a possibility that someone could come here and ask for $100,000, come back to us 6 months later and say, this and this and this have happened, I could use another 100,000, or what does that look like?
The cap is per borrower, so it would be limited to the company. As far as the cap goes, if there was a request for additional funding or to restructure or have additional funds, that would come back to this committee. They would either make a request to alter their existing loan, or they would submit another application for a separate loan. I think some of that comes down to how does that tie back to what the original loan was for, and how it would significantly differ from the original request.
And my
But yes.
understanding is that the EDA max is $340-something thousand. We would approve moving forward with that, but we would just advertise for 200. If a loan came forward for 280, this committee would consider extending beyond the advertised 200. Is that the intention?
If there was a
of the
compelling
committee?
reason, we could consider it.
Very good. Yes.
That's my understanding. Okay, those are my questions. Thank you again for your work on this.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any further questions or comments? Staff, do you feel like you have sufficient direction from the committee?
This has been very helpful, and I do want to specifically thank Mr. Wolf. He spent some time with us with his commercial lending expertise. It was very helpful in crafting something that, with the input from all of you, I think we've got a very good path forward.
And we're not looking for a vote today, just input, and then that will be brought forward to JDA? Or would you like a vote on the general discussion, a green light on the general discussion so far?
Right, support for the modifications that we have included in the staff report, and then as discussed today, we'll clean that up and kind of summarize it when it goes to JDA, run it past EDA to make sure we're all on the same page. But yes, a motion would be appreciated.
Very good. Anyone want? Mr. Wolf?
Yes, Mr. Chair, so if what was outlined in the agenda, with the addition of an internal maximum limit of $200,000 and a turn down letter required for any loans over $100,000, I would make a motion that we recommend approval with those two additions.
Wonderful. We have a motion from Mr. Wolf.
I'll second that.
We have a second from, is that Mr. Russell? Or Mr. Kavami? We have a second from Mr. Kavami. Hearing no further comments or questions, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Not sure if I got that second right or not. I think I got it wrong, but very good. It was Crary. Let's change that for the record. Moving on then to the next item on the agenda, we have a C-Run loan. Mr. Hanson.
Yes, Chair Weber, members of the Growth Fund Committee, in front of you is a loan request from French Taste LLC. Certainly no stranger to the Growth Fund, owned and operated by Warren Sy. French Taste serves sweet and savory crepes as well as beverages. They have received 2 startup loans in the past, and very recently, the first startup loan was repaid in full, and payments for the second startup loan begin in Q2 of this year. With that, the COVID impact, the business has suffered from revenue loss from vendor and catering events specifically in 2020, as well as decline in lost revenue from their new dine-in location at the Grand Cities Mall in Ferguson Books, as well as lost perishable inventory. Their path to recovery and what they plan to use the loan funds for is to cover payroll, especially with events beginning and more dine-in activity picking up. January and February have looked good and have exceeded projections for the business so far, as well as investing in marketing for their Grand Cities location and allowing for more online ordering capabilities for the business and investing in a website. This money will also help stabilize their cash flow generally as the summer of recovery kicks off. And just to remind everyone what we review for the Loan Review Committee, it consists of staff from the EDC, the city, and from the Small Business Development Centers. We look at the collateral available in the business, their debt service coverage, management of the business, history of managing the business, their personal credit, and their debt to equity, as well as looking at the COVID impact that the business has had, other assistance they've had available to them, the circumstances of that business, and their general approach to recovery. With that, we are recommending approval for the loan of up to $25,000 at 1% interest. The existing terms at time of application was a 6-month deferral and 60-month amortization. We would ask for approval if the changes are adopted by JDA to provide that to the French Taste LLC as well. We'd have a UCC lien and then a personal guarantee required. That personal guarantee was determined to be required after we review things like collateral available within the business, the debt service coverage, age of the business, and other risk factors. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Very good. And for clarification, the loan application that we're being asked to consider today is based upon the program as it currently exists, not with the modifications being discussed today. However, if those modifications are approved by the Growth Fund on April 5th, it would retroactively be eligible for those new conditions. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Very good. Any questions, comments from committee members?
Move approval.
You have a motion for Mr. Kvamme.
Second.
Second for Mr. Holt. Hearing no further comments, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Hanson. And then Mr. Brombach, the EDA RLF and FlexPace loan applications from Sundog Mining LLC.
Chairmember Weber, members of the committee, thanks so much. I'm excited to bring this application forward because Sundog Mining is really in that high-tech sector we talk so much about, and they're right in the thick of it. They're making an entrance into the growing industry of data processing that's already valued at more than $50 billion. What they're doing is a startup company and data processing center that's a unique model, competes with some of the largest entities out there. Business provides access to affordable energy and infrastructure in North Dakota to data processors across the country, across the nation. Instead of requiring all the power be transported to a single location, driving initial investment in the tens of millions of dollars, their business model have worked out a way to find pools of stranded infrastructure and unused power. They'll explain all of that to you. Primarily, the project here is to fit up shipping containers that can be more in a modular sense and placed in strategic locations. We'll go through a little bit of a presentation directly from the company. We've also brought in Matt Marshall, Economic Development Administrator from Minn Kota Power, who really lives in this world a little bit to provide some industry insight. And we also have with us today Daryl Jorgensen with Gate City Bank, who's in charge of this loan. I'll wrap up with a description of the financing. But first, I want to just introduce our presenters and company, Aaron Hall and Zach Keenan, to give you an introduction to the company.
Good afternoon. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. So I just want to start with a thank you. This is an accumulation of a lot of hard work on our part, and we're sincerely thankful to be in front of you and that you took the time out of your day.
We've been working hard to bring folks like you forward, so welcome.
Perfect.
Thanks for being here. Yeah.
Glad to hear it. So I'm going to start out with just an introduction, then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of this thing. My name is Aaron Hall. What brings me in front of you today is my experience in small business and small business development. So I own 2 North Dakota small businesses. Both are based in Grand Forks and employ employees throughout the state of North Dakota. I employ approximately 50 people, and I think that was part of that is why Zach kind of came to me when we started this idea. So I'm going to let Zach introduce himself, and then we're going to talk about how we capture this unique regional resource. This is my business partner, Zach.
Thank you again for the time for us to be here and present this opportunity to you. So I am Zach Keenan. I started on the blockchain doing work when I was 14 before I knew what it was or what I was doing. A few years later, I asked my dad if he would spend $1,000 to pull 60 amps up into my closet so I could build some new high power consumption servers. And that just led me down this big old rabbit hole that I've been going down for years and years and years. Eventually, in San Antonio, Texas, which is where I'm from, I started working with the utility over there. What I did there was I sold wholesale electricity as well as help locate large industrial loads. So the last project I was working on when I was over there was a Microsoft data center. So energy, I know the market, and I've got blockchain experience.
Thanks, Zach. So before we go any more into this, I want to start a little bit on some definitions. So when I say blockchain, I'm referring to millions of computers across the world, and they're essentially tied together, the computing power to complete a task. Whether that task is video rendering or, the big one right now is vaccine development or AI research. And there's a couple things that the owners of these machines look for when they're looking for a hosting source. They're looking for the real obvious one, so they're looking for the market payout, of course. So you guys may or may not have heard this little thing called Bitcoin. It's, rocketing to the moon. Another thing is how fast does your computer perform that task? But really, if there's one takeaway that I want you guys to understand here today and why we're here, the cornerstone of it all is a low hosting price. And how we got that low hosting price, that competitive power rate, is why we're here today. And that's what makes us competitive. So it's what everybody wants. And typically, when a big data hosting company comes in, they ask, I've found an industrial site. Here's where it is. How much to bring this power to me? And the result of that is millions, if not, as Brandon said, tens of millions of dollars in infrastructure costs. Based on Zach's knowledge, we took a different approach to that to sidestep those costs. And we asked, well, what do you guys got? And the answer we got was a lot. So for example, Nodak Electric has a substation on the south side of Grand Forks, which they've invested money into. And they did that with the plan that the south side of Grand Forks over the next 5 or 10 years is going to grow to that capacity. But right now, that substation is running at a reduced capacity when it has a lot more availability there. So we said, well, how much for that power? And that's where we got our competitive rate. So we then took a look at okay, now how do we get the hosting there? And that's where we came to Digital Shovel. They're a company from Canada, and they modify specially built shipping containers. Now, I don't want you guys to think about Grandpa's reefer trailer he uses on the farm like I did. They're heavily modified and specially tooled for this exact purpose. So they're designed to bring a lot of power to one location and also simultaneously keep a lot of computers and servers running cool. So there's a bullet point on here that says, we have a low entry point for small level investors. And I like to run that into our value prop because there's more to that story. So we've talked now, how did we grasp this stranded resource, this otherwise asset that nobody would be able to use for another 5 and 10 years? That would be our value prop. But there's more to that story. So Zach, mining at home in his closet, would save $170 a month mining with us. That's half of the national average. But there's more to that story. So our competitors have come in and they've spent tens of millions of dollars in infrastructure upgrade costs. So when they speak to customers, they have to take large bites at the apple because they've got initial investment they need paid back. We have sidestepped those. Our initial investment into this market is relatively low in comparison. So we can talk to Zach. We can talk to business partners I have in the state that are looking to diversify their investment. So there's two sides to our value proposition. First is how we've accessed the stranded resource, but the second side is also that we can talk to the vast majority of clients, whether you have one or whether you have $10 million worth. So that kind of leads me more into now the scalability. You're probably asking yourself, well, that's great. How much of these stranded resources we got? A lot. So without leaving city limits, there's 3 locations I know of. And then you get out into the county, into the region, and it grows exponentially from there. So we've now taken a regional resource unique to North Dakota, and we've applied it to a global market. And what I think now is, how big is this market? So if every server, miner, computer, mining blockchain was placed on Minn Kota's power load, it would be 8,000 times their capacity. It's absolutely huge. So in the end, should we receive the gap funding we requested, we're still looking at a groundbreaking this spring. There is some lead up time with Digital Shovel. It takes about 8 weeks to build one of these containers, but we still plan on facility operation this summer. So I'm going to pass it to Matt Marshall with Minn Kota Power. Thank you all for your time.
Thanks. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman and committee members. My name is Matt Marshall. I'm the economic developer for Minn Kota Power. I'm here today to just give you some perspective on sort of this industry. We acknowledge that it's new and up and coming, and therefore sometimes can be confusing. And some of you recognize me from some other steps we've taken to make Grand Forks as competitive as it can be throughout the world, frankly. And so this group actually started working with Minn Kota before I got there. And when you think about this industry as a whole, we generally see huge blocks. And probably because the operation is decentralized. They can't afford to do anything on the ground because they're sending millions of dollars in infrastructure to get set up, and they have to have huge scale operations. And generally speaking, well, not generally, all the time, there's a minimum investment to even participate at that level for the clients and for the operators themselves. And so when Zach walked in and met with our high-level VPs, it was an approach that hadn't been seen. Like, well, where do you get that stranded power and that stranded power? And we'll just go there, and we can afford to because we're here. And we can do it boots on the ground, and that's a much different approach than everywhere else. The other thing I'd like to highlight for you is just the impact, the positive impact for the city. If I was a councilman, I'd sit there and say, well, okay, this is going to go in a container. What positive impact? And as we talked about with the franchise fees, there's an incredible positive impact for the city/taxpayer. The revenue that they're going to generate through energy consumption alone through franchise fees is going to land somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000 a year. In addition to that, they're going to pay what's called an in lieu tax. It's a version of property taxes that's going to come back and land somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000. So to get that same sort of revenue generation, you'd have to have about $1 million building go up in your community. So it's that type of impact that these large energy users can bring to the taxpayer here. And so because of the steps that Grand Forks has taken recently, Grand Forks is well positioned to either grow with this company or attract an incredibly large user, or both, in the near future. And so I'm available for any questions as well if you have any. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Part of the model is exploiting the cost savings from underutilized capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. Chairman, when we build substations or NODAC builds substations, you either grow for future growth or build for future growth. And so there's a period of time where, that power can't get out of that substation. And what they've done is they've identified, well, why would we build a big centralized location? Why don't we just take that? Because we're here and we can drive from location to location.
But once the development catches up in the south end, for instance.
Correct.
Then there isn't underutilized capacity anymore. What happens at that point?
They could pick this unit up and transfer it to another. We also have substations where there used to be a high demand, and then all of a sudden, for one reason or another, now there's less. And so there's this ability to shuffle if you can manage the logistics and operations on the ground. And that's where maybe some of these larger companies can't, because they're going to come in, they're out-of-state providers. It's harder to do that. And so they're taking a completely different approach. And I joke with these guys all the time that, eventually they'll get so big this isn't going to work. But that'd be a great problem we'll all have someday.
Yeah.
So.
Very good. Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Baumbach.
So I thought I'd come back here and give the structure of the deal here before everybody's available for questions, of course. So the total project is just under $420,000 with company equity coming in at $40,000. The lead bank is Gate City Bank. I mentioned Daryl's here with us in case there are any questions here. And they're looking to finance the project at 6.5% for the first $153,000. So there'd be a flex pace request to buy that down to 1.5%. This is a loan request from the Growth Fund, about $10,000, leveraging $20,000 from the Bank of North Dakota. Additionally, the EDA RLF product is being requested at $225,000, be lent at 2.44%, which is normally what we do at 75% of prime, for 7 years as it is equipment. The loan to value on this is 223%. It's secured through UCC filing on equipment and personal guarantees of both owners. Now, I'll just note a couple of things in that. So you'll notice a couple of differences on this application from previous EDA RLF applications. Although it still aligns with their use for gap financing for startup companies, the EDA product here is at a higher percentage of the overall deal than what it normally is. Normally, we're restricted to just a third of the deal, and this is a greater amount than that. This is due to the changes to the federal programs we described earlier and around the EDA money. They've listed programmatic restrictions for emergency response due to COVID to deploy the money into communities so we can leverage that capital requirements a little bit more. Furthermore, on the loan to value, the nature of the business model doesn't require a lot of tangible assets. And even the equipment that's there, as far as collateral, is discounted because it's pretty specific use. So it's similar in nature to a startup company or software company. You know, there's a great deal of input right away before anything tangible is worth on the balance sheet. So the value of the company and the business model, the value of the company is its business model rather than the equipment itself. Although the pro forma and expected sales are promising, loan to value is higher than we normally see. And speaking with Daryl, and he could certainly speak for himself here too, they're in a position favorable within this structure, but Gate City Bank approaches this deal as they would any other deal. They're not here just to secure the position within the collateral. They're here to support a company for at least 4 reasons he could enumerate, but there's opportunity in that pro forma. They do it because they believe in that model and where they're headed. So for these differences, traditional lenders normally aren't able to get around the complete finance to startups like these. It's precisely what this EDA RLF product has been directed towards for some time. However, we've taken additional mitigation steps. So beyond the corporate guarantee and the personal guarantees, which are sufficiently liquid and can handle the liabilities in case of a bad day. Beyond that, we've asked City Attorney just if we could explore the ability to limit their ability to further extend the personal guarantee. So we kind of agreed to a moratorium on further extension of that personal guarantee, so not to over leverage the personal guarantee. So in summary, here we have a local startup company with a very unique business model, looking to compete in a high-tech industry, something we spent a lot of time talking about, and the next agenda item we'll talk about just a little bit more. They've secured key partnership with Minn Kota Power. The EDA has encouraged us to deploy those dollars beyond those traditional practices, and they are primary sector certified by Department of Commerce definition at the state. For these reasons, the EDC board has seen this application and recommended your consideration. So I'll wrap up there, and there's questions for, as I mentioned, Aaron and Zach, you met them, and Matt, but also Daryl Jorgensen from Gate City Bank is here.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Bombach. Questions or comments from committee members? Mr. Kavami, please.
A couple questions. First one, so the contingency is $40,000 and the owner equity is $40,000. So does that, if the contingency is not used, does that equity leave the business?
Sure. No, maybe, Aaron, if you can explain the contingency just a little bit more, but it was just built in. They're all in on this project and, in fact, have even discussed further capital in if need be.
We wanted to show our faith.
That's yours.
I can't wear that now. Well, so we wanted to express our faith in this right out the gate and say, hey, we back this as well with the equity. So that was the contingency, is our thought of it, is we wanted to lead with that.
Makes sense. Yeah, it's a great idea. Awesome idea. Next question is the EDA RLF. So if these funds are gone, now we just looked at how those funds on our availability of those funds. So are we now reduced to where we have nothing there? Should the match for the technology center, where does that leave us, I guess?
As far as defederalization, and I think Ms. Brooks will be able to answer that question a little bit better, but I think in your balance you shared, it included consideration of this application?
Correct. On your staff report for the defederalization, it lays out where we are today, and at the end of that first paragraph, that says before Sundog. So then our cash balance would be reduced, but our monthly payments would go up.
So we're anticipating that as we're moving forward with the batch. That's my
Correct.
question. 'cause
If this is approved today and then
Sure.
by the JDA, then that would affect our defederalization request and basically reduce our cash balance. Same process, it's just we have less cash up front and more long-term
Sure.
prepayment.
Yeah, I'm just concerned about, so now we're taking more debt, we're more borrowing from ourselves than we had discussed
Exactly.
earlier. Okay. But it's
Insightful
still,
question, yes.
yeah, okay. It's still just borrowing from ourselves, though? Okay.
Anything further?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Wolf, yes, please.
Wolf. A thank you to Mr. Hall, Mr. Keenan, Mr. Marshall, Mr. Jorgensen, Mr. Baumbach. This is exciting. So I want to start there. Continuing with Mr. Kavami's question, just so I'm clear, what we just voted on, we had 1.3 million of EDA RLF funds. I know $500,000 was in cash. We approved this. We'll have less than 1.1 million. That would be, we'd be requesting for deregulation, or is it still the 1.3 million, Ms. Richards?
It'd still be the 1.3. Our capital base is still the same. We're just shifting from liquid cash to a long-term receivable.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Want to confirm with Mr. Baumbach, I think I heard you correctly, but this, with some of the things that are a little bit different than some of the other EDA RLF loans funds we've done in the past, this would be EDA compliant?
Yes, under the further expansion for COVID stress. I don't know what you call that, but
Yep.
EDA granted some waivers to their standard requirements to allow for flexibility as businesses deal with COVID. Those are the words
That was
Brandon was
good.
trying to say.
Okay, thank you. Maybe a question for Mr. Baumbach or Mr. Jorgensen. I think I know the answer, but want to make sure with these exciting new ventures, oftentimes a bank, is not able to help with the entire request. I'm curious, just to make sure, so with the $420,000 project, 40,000 in equity, the 380,000 remaining, 150,000-ish from the lender, Gate City, and then 225 through EDA. How were those amounts arrived at? How did we determine the right split between Gate City and the revolving loan fund?
sure, Darrell, I'd love you to come and answer that too. Yeah, do you want to just jump?
Absolutely. The first thing we did, Mr. Chairman and committee members, is we looked at the business plan as a whole, and of course, as a bank, we have to look at the collateral. So we were able to look at about 80% of the collateral, and then we reached out to Brandon and the rest of the crew here to see what they could finance.
Very good. So would that be, have we in the past required turn down letter of support from the institution on these types of loans?
Yes, we have, and we do have that.
Okay, thank you. Final question is just for Mr. Hall or Mr. Keenan, things that I don't understand, but, so you're going to put a trailer, basically a container somewhere, and it's going to do all this? Is any more color on where can I see it? Is that really what's going to happen somewhere? A trailer, a big trailer is going to go up, and that's the business?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Wolf. You pretty much hit it on the head. I think you and I started at the same point in understanding on this. Yes, so it's going to be it's essentially a mobile data center. It's a container that's going to sit on site at a substation. We're working right now with Nodak Electric to hammer out those details. And it's going to host for, I'm not sure where the camera is here. It's crypto, any kind of crypto mining customers.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Hall. It's, I appreciate that exciting opportunity. Thanks for answering my questions.
Mr. Chair, I think I got
Yes,
a couple
Ms.
of
Whitney,
questions.
please.
too. So I think to follow up on Mr. Wolf's question, just to try to understand your business model a little bit. So Mr. Wolf, you asked my first. So basically, we're putting a C-trailer somewhere, and it's just going to be able to pull power for miners. So thank you for that one. I guess my question is a little bit to understand your business model a little bit more. Do you have current customers and current miners that you kind of lined up already, or what's the capacity of this center and the number of miners you would need to really make this a go? What does that look like for you as a company?
So our initial customer base runs kind of into a problem. And this is kind of where we started in the beginning, is that these things have a shelf life. So they slowly become more obsolete as time goes on. The most important months are the first months. So when we say, hey, we've got this attractive hosting rate, people are like, great, let's sign up. Well, we got about 6 months lead time and we have to purchase, and they benefit, a customer benefits more to go somewhere else. So hopefully that answers that part of the questions about existing customers, is they slowly become obsolete. As far as numbers of miners, I'm going to let Zach talk about the entire capacity of the container.
Thank you. So the starting capacity for the first container is going to be 2.5 megawatts of power. And for us to break even, we need about 800 kilowatts to be hosted out. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess so. How many customers would you hypothetically need, and would they be from North Dakota? Or are you pulling these customers from elsewhere, but they're drawing the power from North Dakota from your substation? What's that look like for you?
Yes, so the container holds 700 units, and to meet that kilowatt amount I mentioned earlier, you're looking at about 200 of them. So, and the customer base is worldwide. We'll start first here in North Dakota. I am currently working with a customer that has 1 megawatt already and is okay with our time frame for a few months down the line, but it's just all talk, nothing signed yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that was actually my next question. What would be the stand-up time for you to be able to start bringing on customers from, say, this gets approved, and what's your timeline on that?
We're looking at up and running summer. So like I said, there's some lead time in purchasing a container. There's some site improvements that need to be made. There needs to be some, probably class 5 and some boring. So we're looking full operation summer of this year.
All right. Thank you very much. Those are my questions, Mr. Chairman. Good luck, and I'm excited for this opportunity and development.
Yes.
Thank you.
If there are no further questions, looking for a motion.
Really quick question.
Please,
and then we'll make a
Mr.
motion.
Holt.
I'm not going to ask any more questions about your business to try to understand it, because we might be here till Friday. If I do that, I'm going to trust Mr. Marshall and you guys. It sounds wonderful and it's exciting. Brandon, you mentioned a moratorium on the personal guarantee, and part of that. And Mr. Gossett, is that no issues with that? Have we ever done anything like that before? Is that?
It's really not a moratorium. What it does is, I'm just looking at the language that I drafted. It simply says that without the lender's prior consent, they won't incur any more debt. And you have to insert the amount of the debt the guarantor will assume. So I've done that before. It's just a limitation on guarantor.
Okay, that's all I had.
But another insightful question nonetheless. Thank you, Mr. Holt. Yes, Mr. Cavani.
Sorry, I have one more question. So any idle units that are not being used, will you guys mine yourself? Will you guys use those? Or will they truly sit idle if you don't have that service sold? So say you've got 700.
So part of our agreement with Nodak Electric requires us to pre-purchase power. So anybody on the shelf is going to be required to be running. That being said, we do 100% intend to personally run our own machines.
So follow-up question is 700 units. I imagine you understand how hard it is to find that. Is the 40,000, is that for price fluctuation or?
So when I say personal units, I meant personal. That 40,000 is to go into operating costs for the company, just to make sure we have that security there. When I say personal units, I mean I intend to buy some. We intend to run them personally as customers.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. I move approval.
We have a motion from Mr. Cavani.
Second.
Second from Mr. Holt. Hearing no further comments or questions, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks for coming in. We've already done a great deal of good, important work this afternoon. We've got a little bit more to do in the next 9.5 minutes here. First of all, Accelerate Grand Forks Loan Program discussion. Looking for some feedback, Mr. Lund.
Chairman, members of the committee, Keith Lund, Grand Forks Region EDC, happy to be here this evening. Before I begin, even though I don't have time, I want to introduce Nathan Eisminger, who is the newest member of the EDC team. He joined the EDC on March 1st. He's our UAS sector developer. Sorry for the folks on the screen, you haven't been able to meet him, and I'm not going to have him get up and introduce himself because of time constraints. I just wanted to make sure that he was introduced to you, and look forward to you meeting and working with him in the
Wonderful.
future.
Welcome, Mr. Eisminger. Yes, hello.
So I'm going to start to think this is personal coming up here with 9 minutes or 5 minutes left to discuss.
You get to be at the top next time.
3 more times and I'm going to think it's intentional. So excited to be here to talk about Accelerate Grand Forks. We've done it a couple of times already, both times I think very quickly. I think we've come here through a couple of different paths. One of them is really from a portfolio discussion and how can we better leverage the resources of the Growth Fund to have a bigger impact on our community. We've also talked a lot about growing tech, and the conversation of the project just prior to this was a big part of that. So I had quite a few comments. I think I'm just going to get to the meat of this and see what kind of conversation we have. We think we have the right ingredients to grow to support a growing tech sector in Grand Forks. We have the support of a very aggressive mayor and a council that really wants to lean into this. This program was really fashioned after the LIFT program at the state of North Dakota that was approved in 2019, a $15 million fund to grow companies like what we're talking about here. I think what's important, the state did it. The state is going to do it again. So the governor supported it in his speech, in his budget address. The House of Representatives put $15 million as a recommendation funding. The House of Representatives, or the Senate, the last number I saw was $27 million. So LIFT will be reauthorized somewhere between $15 and $27 million is what the tea leaves say. So the state of North Dakota has some of the same concerns as does Grand Forks to grow the economy and to do that through the growth of tech and the knowledge-based economy. We've talked about it a lot. We have about a third of a typical region's concentration of tech jobs. It's not something we're really proud about, but something we want to do something about. And we think, the things that we talked about earlier and a program like this would go a long way to do that. Really appreciate Meredith's insightful staff report that went along with the program description, talking about a couple of key considerations that we really wanted to talk to you about, running out of time. Ultimately, to be completely frank, we'd like to have an invitation to bring a full-blown program description for your approval next month. That was really my goal here, to have that conversation. There's a couple of considerations now, whether we want to try to accelerate through that, pardon the pun, or have another conversation on some of those very specifics, but we think we have the framework here. Economic Development Corporation, don't want to speak for my chairman, Mr. Holth, but we've had conversations, and our board is very supportive of that and has given us authorization, I guess, to bring this concept forward. Had conversation with Mayor and his staff and Meredith, and I think we all agree to do something in this space. From companies that we've talked to, Taylor Reed or Autonomy in the past, funds are available. You can access these types of resources, but in many cases they're sympathetic to geographies, i.e. we'll be happy to support you, but move to Portland, as an example. So we want to make sure that the companies that start here stay here with the opportunity to make investments, and we want to have an opportunity to recruit companies, and we've seen that happen in the state and even in the Grand Forks region through LIFT and other resources that we've been able to play locally. So there's some specific terms in here. I think I'm just going to pause for a minute. Any comments, or if we want to, I can certainly walk through some of the specifics. I know we're running out of time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lund. Nicely done. Any questions or suggestions from committee members?
I would welcome a full presentation, I think, at the next meeting. Should we?
Yeah.
Let's make sure Keith is last on the agenda.
Perfect.
For that meeting.
Mr. Wolf, please.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is an exciting concept. I know that there's a lot of work that Mr. Lund and others have done. I'm in favor of pursuing this, but I do think that, and I'd like to see thoughts on how this might look. But I think it's going to take longer than a few, this amount of time that we have left. To me, the one thing that it would jump out, and I know Mr. Lund, you were looking for feedback, is as we look to a program such as this, which I'm certainly in favor of, if we're looking at, basically a payment structure, as I understand it, would be no interest the first 3 years, 2% interest years 4 and 5, but no payments. A question that's very flexible structure, a question would be is what's the repayment source at the end of 5 years? So is that, with these types of ventures, it could be a takeout, sale of a company, it could be that they're ready for bank financing, but something I think that should be addressed. Because at the end of 5 years, if there are no payments, 5 years goes by and then something has to happen. So that's just an observation. So I don't know any comments on that, or maybe next time that could be addressed. And then that was my only high-level comment, I guess.
With the few remaining moments, I'll address that. Thank you, Mr. Wolf. A reason to do something isn't because somebody else does it that way, but I will say that this is structured very much after the way the LIFT program is structured. This is debt, so the growth fund would have a position as a creditor, which is, in better than a position as an investor, in the case of a bad day. No, that's no guarantee that you'll be able to recoup through the assets of the company, but nevertheless, you are a creditor. If the company, what you're doing, I think, what the LIFT program is doing and what we'd be looking to do here locally is to really analyze and have confidence of the business model. There's no guarantees in life, but to have confidence of their success and a great likelihood of that success. If that's the case, I think what's more likely to happen within 5 years is there'd be some kind of significant growth, some type of taking on additional ownership structure to where this would be bought out and just cleared out. So a couple of the projects you've done outside of this programmatic structure, I think the likelihood of having that happen is greater than not. So debt, maintain position as a creditor, but ultimately through repayment of the company 5 years from then, but more than likely through some type of, I'll call it an equity event, within that 5-year period of time.
Very good. And another important part of this is the suggestion that we use up to 10% of the JDA portfolio. Ms. Storstad, do you want to say anything about that today, or do you want to wait till April?
Chairman Weber, members of the committee, we can speak to this more again at the next meeting, but I would just say that, it's just something that when we do look at this program, it may be not all upfront at once, but grow into it and just continue to monitor on an annual basis. So.
Very good, thank you. Further questions or comments at this time, or we'll just wait till April? Get you a better place on the agenda next time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Ms. Richards, if you think Keith was fast, you've got all of about 1 minute and 46 seconds now, I think. For the updates, please.
Very quickly, LM has got their canteen project out for bid now. And so we anticipate a bid opening on the 15th. Assuming that goes well, we would like to bring that approval directly to Growth Fund Committee and then JDA the same night so that we don't hold up construction. That's my only update on that.
On that, if I could quickly, is it absolutely necessary that it come to Growth Fund, or could we give approval for that to go directly to JDA?
If this group is comfortable with, we would only forward it to JDA. If there were no bidding irregularities, that would certainly, expedite our process.
Would committee members be willing to consider a motion? We have a motion from Mr. Russell.
Yep, so moved.
And a second from Mr. Kavami. Further questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Very good. And then Corporate Center, Ms. Richards.
Just nothing earth-shattering. We continue to proceed with discussions with tenants and potential buyers. We are getting the appraisal updated. We are actively working right now with putting together a proposal to GSA to ensure that we retain Social Security as our third floor tenant in Corporate 2. Their lease is up in a year, but GSA requires a year in advance. And then we will be advertising our vacant first floor space on LoopNet here in the next few days.
GSA, that's Social Security Administration tenant?
Correct.
Very good. Questions for Ms. Richards on that? Otherwise, with plenty of time remaining, looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We have a motion, meeting adjourned. Thanks.